Okay, so the next thing that we talk about are different types of hormones, and we're going to mention this, but we don't go into it in a lot of detail. Whenever we're looking at the different types of hormones, we're going to really be concerned with their polarity, um, and so I'll describe to y'all or explain to y'all what this means. So the three different types are going to be steroids. This is type 1, biogenic amines, which is modified amino acids, or proteins, which are going to be chunks of amino acids all put together. And so these are our three different types. I'm not going to ask you about the different molecular structures, and so you don't have to worry about that. So we will talk a little bit about each one. So steroids, the main thing that y'all need to know about steroids is they are lipid soluble, which means they don't mix with water. And if you'll think about your body is primarily made of water. And so this is going to be important whenever we talk about how we are going to transport these steroids. So steroids, examples of steroids would be like estrogen or also testosterone. Um, and so these are very common steroids, or also some things like cortisol, which come from your adrenal cortex. The next category is biogenic amines, which are modified amino acids. And so there are a few different types here. You'll just need to know that these are kind of small. And so whenever they're kind of small molecules, typically they're not symmetrical. And so this typically means that they are polar. And so this is unlike these lipid soluble ones, which are non-polar. There is one exception for biogenic amines, and that's thyroid hormone. And so this one is actually non-polar. So, and the reason why it's non-polar is because it is symmetrical. It's made of a pair of tyrosines, and so whenever it's symmetrical, the charges are distributed evenly, and it's not polar. But most biogenic amines are polar, meaning that they are water soluble, and so meaning that they are water soluble means that they can dissolve in water, which is important because our body is mostly made of water. And the last one is proteins. And proteins typically have very large chunks. As a result, there's going to be a lot of different asymmetrical characteristics of these. And so they're usually, or they are, water soluble. So these things will be able to dissolve in water, will be able to be transported throughout your body easily. So we talked about different categories of hormones chemically. Now we're going to talk about some circulation patterns of hormones. And so I mentioned earlier that hormones are released from a secreting cell, and their goal is to circulate through your body to make it to a target cell. And the way that they get transported back and forth is by your body's blood. And so this is the standard endocrine um, pattern or path, but it's not the way it always is. So there are a couple other alternatives. So the first one we'll talk about is autocrine. So this is the cell that's secreting, and this cell, it secretes these hormones, and these hormones have to find a receptor, but it just so happens that the receptor is on the cell that secreted it. So auto means self. So this is a cell stimulating itself with these hormones. Paracrine is going to happen within a neighborhood. And so there will be one cell secreting these hormones, and this is going to then travel through your body's fluids, but it doesn't travel very far. It doesn't make it into your bloodstream. It just goes to neighboring cells. So that's what the word para means, is just surrounding or neighboring cells, and it stimulates them. Versus the classic endocrine category where these hormones are circulated broad scale through your bloodstream. So a different or special type of local hormone is called an eicosanoid. And eicosanoids are important. These are going to be formed in the phospholipid bilayer of your cells, and this is going to be what helps give you or make you feel pain. And so there are literally textbooks written about eicosanoids. So I'm just going to say for y'all right now, they're a very diverse type of hormone that are produced in the phospholipid bilayer of your cell membrane, and they stimulate pain. And there is a two-step process in order to get these hormones present. So these are the three different types of eicosanoids, 1, 2, and 3. And so if these things, for example, stimulate pain, if you prevent them from being formed in either of these two steps, you prevent that pain. And so two different ways of preventing that pain might be taking some Tylenol or Advil, or putting hydrocortisone on it. So for example, I think it's prostaglandins. They stimulate pain, but they also can make you feel itchy. So if you get really itchy because of an allergic reaction, if you rub hydrocortisone cream on it, it prevents that from being formed, and so you don't feel itchy at that location. So I was correct. Prostaglandins are those ones. Most tissues make this type of hormone. It's responsible for pain and inflammation. It also makes you feel itchy, and so here you can see pain and inflammation or itchiness. So you can take something like aspirin, or you can take something like hydrocortisone, and it makes that go away. So now we get to this section. This is going to be a bigger section, and because this is going to build off of how do these hormones respond to target cells and how are they transported. And so I mentioned to y'all that there are different types of hormones that were either lipid soluble or water soluble, and their solubility is going to determine how they are transported and how they respond to cells. So you know already that water does not mix with oil. And so if something is lipid soluble and it is in the oil, it is not going to be transported by anything in water, because it doesn't mix, right? So that's a problem. So examples of lipid-soluble hormones are those steroids. Remember, steroids and thyroid hormone, which was the one exception for those biogenic amines. Some examples of steroids might be testosterone. And the way that these things are going to get from point A to point B, if they can't mix with water, and they're lipid soluble or they're water insoluble, these things aren't going to be able to be bound by membranes. They're just going to diffuse out, and they won't mix well with the water, but they will come and you will produce a lot of transport molecules, and these will circulate in your blood, and they will bind these hormones. And so this carries the hormone throughout the body and helps deliver it to locations where it can be used. So 99% of these hormones are going to be bound to carrier proteins. Very few of these hormones are free because they're not water soluble. They can't bind very well. But it is this free hormone that is usable. So typically, this chemical reaction that binds the hormone to the transport, it's not a permanent chemical reaction. It is concentration dependent. So if, for example, there is a whole lot of a hormone of that hormone is going to get bound to transports. And so you can just think about it very simply. If there's more hormone, you're going to have a lot of it, or 99% of it, always get bound. And so if you have very little of that hormone, you will have 99% of it bound, which gives you not very much free hormone, which would be about 1%. So the water-soluble hormones, these can be prevented from exiting a cell. So these have to be secreted by exocytosis. They don't just diffuse outwards like the lipid-soluble hormones. And these are going to just dissolve very easily inside of the blood and get transported around.